8-year-old Emma Martinez stood pressed against the cold window of the black sedan, her small hands trembling as she watched the world blur past. The car smelled like cigarettes and fear. Her father sat beside her, his jaw clenched tight while her mother stared straight ahead with tears streaming down her face. Nobody spoke, but Emma could feel the danger hanging in the air like a heavy blanket. 3 hours earlier, Emma had been playing with her dolls in her bedroom when strange men knocked on their front door. Her father had whispered urgently to her mother before rushing to pack a bag. Emma didn't understand why they had to leave so suddenly, or why her parents looked so scared. All she knew was that the men in dark suits weren't friendly, and something was very wrong. The car pulled up to a magnificent palace with tall golden gates and guards in bright red uniforms. Emma had seen places like this in her picture books, but never imagined she would actually visit one. The driver, a man with cold eyes and a scar across his cheek, turned around and spoke in a harsh voice that made Emma shrink back into her seat. "Remember what we discussed," he said to her father. "You have one chance to make this right. Your daughter's safety depends on it." Emma's father nodded quickly, his face pale as paper. She had never seen him look so frightened before, and it made her stomach twist with worry. As they approached the palace entrance, Emma noticed crowds of people gathered behind barriers, waving flags and taking pictures. Tourist buses lined the streets, and children her age pointed excitedly at the grand building. Everything looked normal and happy on the outside, but inside their car, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The security checkpoint ahead had several guards in crisp uniforms checking every vehicle. Emma watched as they examined documents, looked inside cars, and asked questions. Her heart began to race as she realized this might be her only chance to get help. She had learned about emergency signals in school, and suddenly remembered what her teacher had taught them about asking for help when adults couldn't. Her parents were focused on the approaching guards, whispering nervously to each other about what they would say. The scary man in the front seat was checking his phone and didn't notice Emma studying the guards outside. She had to be smart about this. If she could somehow signal for help without the bad man noticing, maybe someone would understand that they were in trouble. The palace guard who approached their car looked kind and professional. He wore a perfectly pressed uniform with shiny badges, and his eyes seemed alert and intelligent. Emma felt a spark of hope. This man looked like someone who would help a scared little girl if he knew she needed it. But how could she let him know without putting her family in even more danger? As the guard bent down to speak with the driver, Emma made a decision that would change everything. She pressed her face against the window and began to tap out a pattern with her finger. 3 short taps, 3 long taps, 3 short taps again. It was the SOS signal her teacher had shown them in safety class. She repeated it over and over, hoping desperately that the guard would notice and understand what it meant. Royal Guard James Mitchell had been working security at the palace for 12 years, and he prided himself on noticing details that others missed. Today felt like any other busy afternoon, with tourists streaming through the gates and official vehicles arriving for scheduled meetings. He approached the black sedan with his usual professional demeanor, ready to check credentials and wave them through. As James bent down to examine the driver's identification, something caught his eye in his peripheral vision. A small hand was tapping against the rear window in a very specific pattern. 3 quick taps followed by 3 slower ones, then 3 quick taps again. His blood ran cold as he recognized the universal distress signal, SOS. The little girl in the back seat had blonde hair and wide blue eyes that looked terrified. She was being very careful to tap only when the adults in the car weren't looking at her. James had specialized training in recognizing signs of distress and human trafficking, and every instinct told him something was seriously wrong with this situation. The driver handed over documents that appeared legitimate, but James noticed the man's hands were shaking slightly. The adults in the car seemed nervous, which wasn't unusual for people visiting the palace, but combined with the child's desperate signal, it painted a disturbing picture. James needed to act carefully. If these people were dangerous, any wrong move could put the little girl in even greater danger. "Purpose of your visit today?" James asked in his standard professional tone, while discreetly pressing a small button on his radio that would alert other guards to pay attention to this vehicle. The signal would bring backup without creating obvious alarm. "Business meeting with tourism officials," the driver replied, but his accent seemed forced, and he avoided making eye contact. James had seen enough fake documents and nervous criminals to know when something wasn't right. Meanwhile, the little girl continued her desperate tapping whenever she thought it was safe. James pretended to study the papers more carefully while actually observing the family dynamics in the car. The man and woman in the back seat looked genuinely terrified, and they kept glancing at their daughter with worry. This wasn't a typical kidnapping scenario. These appeared to be the child's real parents, but they were clearly being forced into something against their will. The little girl suddenly stopped tapping and looked directly at James through the window. In that moment, their eyes met, and he saw pure desperation in her gaze. She mouthed the word help so quietly that only someone trained to read lips could have caught it. James felt his heart race as he realized he was looking at a child who knew she was in grave danger. 2 other guards approached the vehicle, responding to James's silent alert. He needed to make a decision quickly. Standard protocol would be to either wave the car through or ask them to pull aside for additional screening. But James sensed that this situation required something more immediate and decisive. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle for a routine security check," James announced, his hand moving casually toward his radio. The driver's eyes flashed with anger and something that looked like panic. James knew he had just escalated a dangerous situation, but that little girl's SOS signal had been clear. They needed help, and they needed it now. The driver's face changed completely when James asked them to step out of the car. What had been nervous politeness turned into something cold and dangerous. "That won't be necessary, officer," he said with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're already running late for our appointment." James stood his ground, his training kicking in. He had called for backup, and within seconds 3 more guards appeared around the vehicle. The driver looked around frantically, realizing he was now surrounded. Emma watched from the back seat as the tension reached a breaking point. "Sir, this is standard procedure," James said calmly, but his hand was now resting on his radio, ready to call for emergency response if needed. "Please step out of the vehicle so we can complete our security check." The driver's hand moved towards something under his jacket, and James immediately recognized the threat. In one swift motion, he signaled to his fellow guards while simultaneously opening the car door where Emma sat. "Everyone remain calm," he announced loudly, but his priority was getting the child to safety. Emma's parents exchanged terrified glances as they realized the situation was about to explode. Her father whispered urgently, "Emma, when I say run, you run to the guards and don't look back." Her mother nodded, tears streaming down her face as she prepared to protect her daughter at any cost. The driver suddenly lunged forward, trying to restart the car and escape, but the other guards were ready. They surrounded the vehicle completely, and James quickly pulled Emma out of the back seat and behind the safety of a concrete barrier. She was shaking like a leaf, but she was finally away from the scary man who had threatened her family. "You're safe now," James told Emma gently, kneeling down to her level. "You did exactly the right thing by signaling for help. You're a very brave girl." Emma burst into tears, all the fear and stress of the past few hours finally pouring out of her. Meanwhile, the other guards were working to safely extract Emma's parents from the vehicle while keeping the driver contained. It became clear that this man had been forcing the family to participate in some kind of illegal scheme, using Emma as leverage to ensure their cooperation. Emma's father, now free from immediate danger, rushed over to his daughter and swept her up in his arms. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "I never wanted you to be scared like that." Emma's mother joined them, and the family held each other tightly while guards secured the scene. James watched the reunion with satisfaction, knowing that his decision to take the child's SOS signal seriously had prevented something terrible from happening. The driver was now in custody and the family was safe. But James realized this was just the beginning of uncovering what had really been going on. As backup units arrived and began processing the scene, James stayed with Emma and her family. He could see that they were still frightened and would need time to recover from their ordeal. The little girl who had been brave enough to signal for help when the adults couldn't deserved to know that her quick thinking had saved them all. Inside the palace security office, the full scope of the situation began to unfold. Detective Sarah Chen, who specialized in organized crime cases, arrived within 30 minutes to take over the investigation. Emma sat in a comfortable chair with a cup of hot chocolate, finally feeling safe for the first time in hours, while her parents spoke with investigators in the next room. The man who had been driving their car turned out to be Viktor Petrov, a known criminal with connections to international smuggling operations. When police searched his phone and belongings, they discovered evidence of a much larger scheme that had been targeting families across the city for months. "Emma," Detective Chen said gently, sitting across from the brave little girl, "can you tell me how you knew to use that special tapping signal?" Emma explained how her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had taught their class about emergency signals during safety week. She had practiced the SOS pattern at home, never imagining she would actually need to use it. The detective was amazed by Emma's presence of mind under such frightening circumstances. Most adults would have panicked in that situation, but this 8-year-old had remembered her lessons and found a way to communicate distress without alerting her captors. Her quick thinking had not only saved her own family but potentially prevented other families from falling victim to the same criminals. Emma's parents were finally able to explain their side of the story. David Martinez, Emma's father, worked as an accountant for a small import business. 3 weeks earlier, he had discovered that his company was being used to hide illegal financial transactions. When he tried to report it to authorities, the criminals found out and threatened his family. They had been forced to participate in money laundering operations, with Emma's safety used as constant leverage to ensure their silence and cooperation. The trip to the palace had been part of a plan to use David's legitimate business credentials to smuggle something valuable out of the country. During what appeared to be a routine diplomatic meeting, they told us that if we didn't cooperate, they would hurt Emma, her mother Maria explained through tears. We felt completely trapped. We never imagined our 8-year-old daughter would be the one to save us all. Detective Chen revealed that this criminal organization had been under investigation for months, but police had been unable to gather enough evidence to make arrests. Emma's brave action had provided the breakthrough they needed to bring down the entire operation. The evidence found in Victor's possession led to immediate raids on several locations across the city. Within hours, police arrested 12 people connected to the smuggling ring, including the corrupt business owner who had been threatening Emma's family. Bank accounts were frozen, and illegal operations that had been running for over 2 years were finally shut down. James Mitchell, the guard who had recognized Emma's signal, was commended for his alertness and quick action. He had followed his training perfectly, but more importantly, he had trusted his instincts when he saw a child in distress. His decision to take Emma's SOS seriously had broken open a major criminal case. As the day wore on, Emma began to understand that her scary experience had actually helped catch some very bad people who had been hurting other families too. She felt proud that her teacher's lessons had been so important, and she couldn't wait to tell Mrs. Rodriguez how the SOS signal had really worked when she needed it most. News of Emma's heroic actions spread quickly through the palace and beyond. Within hours, major news outlets were reporting the story of the brave 8-year-old who had used an SOS signal to expose a criminal organization and save her family. The story captured the public's imagination and sparked important conversations about child safety education. Queen Elizabeth herself requested a private meeting with Emma and her family. The little girl who had been terrified just hours earlier now found herself in the grand throne room of the palace, wearing her best dress and feeling like she was living in a fairy tale. The Queen praised Emma's courage and quick thinking, telling her that she had shown bravery that many adults would struggle to match. "Your teachers should be very proud," the Queen told Emma with a warm smile. "You remembered your lessons when it mattered most, and you helped protect not just your own family, but many other families too." Emma beamed with pride, though she still didn't fully understand how big an impact her actions had made. The criminal investigation continued to uncover shocking details about the smuggling operation. Viktor Petrov and his associates had been running a sophisticated network that targeted middle-class families with young children. They would find people in vulnerable positions, like David's accidental discovery of illegal activities, and use threats against their children to force cooperation. Detective Chen explained to reporters that this type of criminal organization relied on victims being too scared to seek help. Emma's courage in signaling for assistance broke that cycle of fear, she said. Her actions reminded us all that even children can play a crucial role in stopping crime when they're properly educated about safety. The investigation revealed that at least 15 other families had been victimized by this same group over the past 2 years. Some had been forced to launder money, others to smuggle goods, and several had been coerced into providing false documentation for illegal activities. All of these families had remained silent because of threats against their children. Emma's school, Lincoln Elementary, became a focal point for media attention. Principal Johnson and Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, were interviewed about their safety education program. They explained how they taught children to recognize dangerous situations and communicate distress when they couldn't speak freely. We never expected one of our students would need to use these skills in such a dramatic way, Mrs. Rodriguez said. But Emma's experience proves how important it is to teach children that they have the power to get help, even when adults around them are unable to do so. The Palace security team, led by James Mitchell, received official recognition for their professional handling of the situation. Their quick response and careful coordination had prevented the situation from escalating into violence while ensuring Emma's safety remained the top priority throughout the incident. As the full extent of the criminal network was exposed, other law enforcement agencies in neighboring countries began reviewing similar unsolved cases. Emma's brave action had provided the key that unlocked a much larger investigation, spanning multiple nations and potentially involving hundreds of victims. The Martinez family, while grateful for their safety and the outpouring of support, struggled with the sudden media attention. They wanted to return to their normal lives, but they also recognized that sharing their story might help other families who were facing similar threats. David and Maria decided to speak publicly about their experience, hoping to encourage other victims to seek help. 3 weeks after the dramatic events at the palace, the ripple effects of Emma's brave action continued to spread across the community and beyond. The Martinez family had been moved to a safe location while the full criminal investigation was completed, but they were finally beginning to feel like their lives could return to normal. Emma returned to Lincoln Elementary School as a hero. Her classmates gathered around her during lunch, wanting to hear the story again and again. Mrs. Rodriguez used Emma's experience as a powerful teaching moment, showing all her students how the safety lessons they learned in class could actually save lives in real situations. Emma remembered what we taught her about the SOS signal. Mrs. Rodriguez explained to her class, but more importantly, she had the courage to use it when she was scared. That's what being brave really means, doing the right thing even when you're frightened. The school district decided to expand their safety education program based on the success of Emma's training. They developed new curriculum that would teach children in all elementary schools how to recognize dangerous situations and communicate distress through various methods. Emma's story became a central part of this program, inspiring other children to pay attention during safety lessons. Detective Chen's investigation had uncovered the full scope of the criminal organization. Viktor Petrov was sentenced to 15 years in prison, along with 11 other members of his network. The corrupt business owner who had initially threatened David Martinez received a 10-year sentence for money laundering and extortion. Most importantly, all 15 families who had been victimized by this criminal group were finally free from the threats that had controlled their lives for months or years. Several of these families reached out to the Martinez family to express their gratitude for Emma's courage in speaking up when they had been too afraid to seek help themselves. James Mitchell, the royal guard who had recognized Emma's signal, was promoted to head of palace security. He implemented new training protocols that emphasized the importance of watching for distress signals from visitors, especially children who might not be able to speak freely about dangerous situations. The palace itself became a symbol of safety and protection for children in distress. Queen Elizabeth announced the establishment of a new foundation dedicated to child safety education, with Emma serving as the inspiration for programs that would teach emergency communication skills to children throughout the country. Emma's story reached international attention when the United Nations invited her family to speak at a conference on human trafficking and child protection. At 8 years old, Emma became one of the youngest people ever to address the UN about crime prevention, though her parents made sure she understood this was an honor rather than a burden. "I just want other kids to know that they can get help if they're scared," Emma told the assembled delegates through a video message. "Adults taught me how to ask for help and it worked. Everyone should learn these signals because you never know when you might need them." The impact on Emma's family was profound but positive. David found a new job with a completely legitimate company that was recommended by law enforcement officials. Maria started volunteering with organizations that helped other families recover from criminal victimization. They had learned that their terrifying experience could be transformed into something that helped others. The bond between Emma and James Mitchell, the guard who had saved her, continued as he became something of a mentor to the young girl. He visited her school to speak about the importance of safety, awareness, and always reminded students that heroes come in all sizes, sometimes even 8-year-old girls who remember their lessons at exactly the right moment. 1 year later, Emma Martinez stood on the stage at the National Child Safety Conference, no longer the frightened little girl who had tapped desperately on a car window. At 9 years old, she had become a confident young advocate for child safety education, speaking to audiences of teachers, parents, and law enforcement officials about the importance of teaching children how to ask for help. The Martinez family had settled into their new life with a sense of peace they had never experienced before. David's new job was fulfilling and completely legitimate, while Maria had become a full-time advocate for families affected by crime. Their terrible experience had transformed into a mission to help others, and they felt proud of how they had turned their trauma into something positive. Emma's school had become a model for safety. Education programs across the country. Mrs. Rodriguez received national recognition for her teaching methods, and the SOS signal lesson that had once seemed like a simple classroom exercise was now taught in schools around the world. Emma often visited other schools to share her story and encourage children to pay attention during safety lessons. The criminal organization that had threatened Emma's family was completely dismantled. International law enforcement cooperation had led to arrests in 5 different countries, with over 50 people ultimately convicted of various crimes including human trafficking, money laundering, and extortion. The ripple effect of Emma's brave signal had helped break up one of the largest criminal networks operating in Europe. James Mitchell had become a close family friend and continued to serve as head of palace security. He had developed innovative training programs that were now used by security forces around the world. His experience with Emma had taught him that sometimes the most important threats come from the most unexpected sources, and that listening to children could be the key to solving serious crimes. The Queen's Child Safety Foundation, inspired by Emma's story, had grown into a major international organization. They had distributed safety education materials to schools in over 30 countries and trained thousands of teachers to recognize signs of distress in their students. Emma served as the foundation's youngest ambassador, appearing in educational videos that taught children various ways to signal for help. Detective Chen had been promoted to head a new task force focused on crimes against families. She often spoke about how Emma's case had changed her approach to investigations, emphasizing the importance of taking reports from children seriously and recognizing that young people could be valuable witnesses and even heroes in the fight against crime. The impact of Emma's story extended far beyond law enforcement and education. Child psychologists used her experience to help other young victims of crime understand that their voices mattered and that speaking up could lead to positive change. Her story became a source of hope for families who felt trapped by criminal threats. Emma herself had grown into a confident, articulate young girl who understood the power of her experience without being defined by the trauma. She continued to excel in school, maintained close friendships, and enjoyed normal childhood activities while also accepting the responsibility that came with being a public figure in child safety, advocacy. The simple SOS signal that Emma had learned in Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom had saved not just her own family, but dozens of other families who had been trapped by the same criminal organization. Her 3 short taps, 3 long taps, and 3 short taps again had echoed around the world, inspiring new safety programs and giving hope to children everywhere that they had the power to change dangerous situations. As Emma looked out at the audience of adults who had come to learn from her experience, she felt proud of how far she had come from that scared little girl in the car. She had learned that being brave didn't mean not being afraid. It meant doing the right thing even when you were terrified. And that lesson, she knew, would serve her well for the rest of her life.